The views expressed in this episode may be distressing and controversial for some audiences. The opinions expressed are not held by Why Believe or its associates. Listener discretion is advised.
Why are there certain people that are the spiritual gurus or the people that are, I'm the one that knows this stuff, pay me and it will fix itself?
It's very common when someone has a mystical awakening that they want to help or be of service in some way, shape or form. Right now, I just see that we've got like mass hysteria and mass hypnosis actually. We've been hypnotized.
You've tuned in to Why Believe, the world's most controversial podcast on religion and belief with TikToker and researcher Cael O'Donnell.
Hi guys, welcome to the show. My name's Cael and I'm joined here with Brendan Murphy today. Brendan, how are you?
Good, Cael. It's good to be here with you, mate.
Yeah, it's good to be with you too. Brendan, it's our first meeting, but I've done some really interesting research about you to get to know what your movement is. I just want to give you an opportunity to let our listeners know, who are you? Who is Brendan Murphy?
I guess you could say I'm an author, speaker, public figure, a bit of an entrepreneur. My dedication really lies in the realm of educating and awakening and inspiring and showing people, expanding the sense of possibility and exploring reality and expanding that in those horizons. So that's a very simplified answer, but somewhere on the right track.
So are you a person who was raised in a religion, or were you part of a spirituality, like your parents were a part of a spirituality?
No, my folks weren't. They were probably nominally Christian-ish. So I went to a primary school, which was a public school where they had like scripture classes, and it didn't last the whole way through. But I remember it was there for some time, and so I received a certain amount of indoctrination in that period of time into Christianity, and sort of like a Bible belief kind of perspective, and then. My parents didn't really talk about anything spiritual or what have you at home. So that was basically my only exposure to it. And from there, I ended up going to a high school, which was Anglican. So again, a bit more sort of exposure and some more indoctrination. But, it never really I never went down that road of becoming one of those people who is, I don't have a believer's mindset is, I guess, one way of putting it, and cutting to the chase. Like that's my mindset, is to always dig deeper and to always ask questions and to challenge a belief system rather than participate in it. So that's my mentality. I piss off a lot of people.
That's the type of people we love on this show. So you said you used the phrase indoctrination. I suppose as a primary schooler, as a young person, you probably didn't know that word. Did you know that that's what they were doing when you were at that age, indoctrinating?
Oh no, I mean, I didn't have any perspective. I mean, when you're like 7 years old, what are you gonna? It's just like you accept reality as it's presented to you by the big people, the adults, and you kind of see them unconsciously or consciously as being kind of godlike. So you wouldn't question their, a child doesn't have a great sense of sort of sophisticated, in analytical ability, until that develops over time. So we're all kind of very naive and gullible. And I didn't realize at the time, obviously, like I had no idea that this is just a belief system and there's 1,000 or 1 billion other belief systems that I could be being exposed to right now, but I'm copying this one. So, perspective is a wonderful thing. And I wish we would do more to encourage it in classrooms and, other venues around the place.
Yeah. So did you go to church? Did you pray and read the Bible and actually feel as if like for a moment you were a Christian? Because you said you didn't have a believer's mindset, but did you ever like take on that label in a way?
Well, I think I kind of had a bit of a believer's mindset going through into my teens. So it was more like, and I was probably just like, I don't know, somewhere middle of the road. Like I kind of just accepted the programming that I've been exposed to, and I wasn't really into it. I didn't go to church. I didn't have I attended a few Bible studies groups in high school. I think it must have been like age 16, 17, 18, just to humor a couple of really very strongly Christian friends of mine. And that's interesting. That's an interesting experience in itself. But yeah, the older I got, the more I just moved away from the mindset of accepting and believing. And I guess it's always a good experience, at least once, to experience being wrong about something, or to get burned by being committed to a wrong belief, or being embarrassed as you get exposed, like being exposed in a wrong belief or caught out, so to speak. So I think I probably had one or two of those moments where it was like, oh, shit, I don't know what I'm talking about, and maybe I should actually investigate something before I have an opinion about it. And so that's kind of the place where I've lived my adult life. Is often I won't say much about a subject until I've really done some study on it and realized and gotten some perspective, and then I can share things, and I point out blind spots and what have you. And I like to fill those gaps and challenge the assumptions that people make, and go, well, actually, to get from here to here, you've had to make this assumption and this assumption and this assumption, and let's actually go back and challenge those and see if they're justified. Is there any evidence? That kind of mentality, a bit like a detective, which is, again, and drives people crazy, because most people don't want to have to think. It's hard work. So people like me, it's like when you like me, you like me, and when you don't, you really don't.
Black or white. So
Yeah.
You sound like you had a very analytical mind, and from an early age, you started to come to light of what was going on, and what you really were believing or not believing. Do you remember the age where you decided that you were sort of like a blank slate again, where you were just going to look into something else, where Christianity was no longer, or was it just vague kind of distancing from religion?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think the key point for me was I got exposed to a piece of information that was, it was like the right place at the right time. And it was a book by a physicist called Michael Talbot. And my brother actually told me to read it because he had some guy come to school one day, and I'm 3 years older, so I was already out of school. But anyway, he was year 11, I think, maybe year 12. And he said, yeah, we had this young entrepreneur come in, and he was talking about this book by this physicist called The Holographic Universe. And for some reason, he felt really compelled to tell me about that. Like, he felt like he needed to let me know that this book existed. And so I was like, okay, cool. Made a mental note, and then, for 6 months or so, I did absolutely nothing with that. And eventually got around to looking this book up. And by that point in time, like, I'd been out of school for a little while, away from, that kind of environment, and, kind of just didn't have a well-developed sense of, or a model of reality, or a sense of metaphysics or spirituality at all. It was just kind of ambiguous. It was like this mix of like modern day agnosticism, scientism, Christianity, all kind of blended together in this amorphous hodgepodge. And reading that book just absolutely blew all that to pieces. Just showed me, like, I don't know anything. I don't know a damn thing. And it was such an amazing perspective check and insight that from that point on, I was just like, I was gone. I was down that track, and I never was able to be normal after that.
Wow, it sounds like that book really shook the foundations, if there was any that had taken root.
Sure. Not a lot going on.
Yeah. And so did you share this experience with your brother? Did you share like what the book meant to you? Or?
Yeah, I think I probably, he knows now that it was a significant thing. I'm not sure if he fully realizes to what extent, but that was the spark. That was what got me started down that road. So, maybe if that book hadn't been there, some other thing would have come along eventually that would have been that trigger. But that was it. And, it's kind of nice and poetic, maybe, that it came from my little brother who I get along with and really love. So it's kind of nice. And since then, I went down that road really hardcore, and I've never had a normal, like, I've never worked a full-time job. I've never done the 9 to 5. And he, being more mainstream, has kind of been, and being the younger brother, he's been able to kind of take from what I've, learned and the journey I've had, and that's influenced him in a positive way over time, gradually. And he's become more and more kind of like alternatively minded, even though he still, works in the corporate world. He's quite switched on and quite aware.
Wow. So Brendan, did you ever believe in a God?
Yeah, I did. I definitely remember, and I remember having probably in my early teens, I remember I found this like weird little lump kind of down near my groin, or actually in my pubic region. And it was like only a small little lump, and at that point in time, I was still kind of more of a probably Christian mindset, at least as far as like a sense of metaphysics goes. And so I remember distinctly praying to my idea of God, or might have been Jesus, I don't know, and to get rid of this thing, this lump, whatever it was. And long story short, it did go, disappeared. But of course, you know, in hindsight, with perspective and having done a lot of study in this realm, I know, and I've written about this in my book, which is, you know, the fact is it doesn't matter who or what you pray to. The act of prayer is the act of sending directed, focused intention out into some part of reality or some system within reality and influencing that system. So the studies have been done and shown that it doesn't matter who or what you pray to, you are still going to influence reality, particularly if you're coming from the heart. If you're trying to benefit someone or also their health in a positive way, then you'll be able to do that no matter, you know, who or what. You can pray to the flying spaghetti monster. It doesn't really matter.
Right, I see. So at that moment, it was Jesus. It was God that you were praying to, hoping that He was the one healing you of this boil or whatever it was. And then you, in hindsight, you look back and realize that it had a better explanation for you down the track that you actually practice now. So, do you believe that God still exists today, or any God?
Well, it depends. I don't think I'd agree with many Christians on their definition of God. I haven't found too many yet who have much of a God worth paying attention to. So yeah, I think it's more of an understanding of, okay, if you're going to use that terminology, you have to define what it means. And you know, my experience has been, I've come from a place of direct experience, like altered states of consciousness, because ultimately, that's the only way we find anything out, is by our direct experience. You know, like we only will find out what happens when we die by dying and finding out, like, because that's the only way we apprehend information is internally through our minds. So that's the place I came from, and I've had those mystical experiences. And I had the first major one shortly after reading Talbot's book, which was, that was the thing, the event that locked in place that understanding and that perspective that I got from the book. It allowed me to ground it into kind of like into the cells of my body, and I understood and I knew, and I didn't have to believe anything anymore because I had the experience that allowed me to access knowing and leave believing behind. And so I had contact with a field of consciousness, an infinite field of consciousness with no beginning and no end, which was very hard to explain or convey to people. But when people ask me, I think the thing that I tell them that stands out the most is the sense of just unbelievable vastness, just incomprehensible vastness of what we actually fundamentally are at the base foundational level.
That's interesting, because I'm trying to equate in my mind, you say the vastness, and then you say like in the field of knowing rather than believing. Because I would feel like if I was in the state of believing, I'd feel like I'm in vastness, because you could believe anything. But if you're in the state of knowing, it's more confined. There's only certain things that we know. Could you help me understand how you make those things, how you make that make sense a little bit more about how knowing something, but there's vastness to that consciousness, if that makes any sense?
Sometimes the way a question is worded makes things interesting. So I think what I'm driving at is that when we're in the mind, when we live in the mind, we have we can apprehend sensory input from our bodies, from the environment, and the mind processes that via the brain. And at that level, we can imagine things. We can picture this or that. We can imagine that everything is possible. We can imagine to be this, that. We can picture ourselves holding hands with Jesus or whatever it is that we want to use our minds to conjure up. But at the level of mind, you're stuck to whatever the mind can conjure and what its capacities are. But when you have a mystical experience like the kinds that I've had, and many people in the mystics through the ages have had, you leave the mind behind. You leave that mental plane completely behind. So you're not operating in that realm of thought and mentation, and like that cognitive space is gone. And you can trade that in, that sensory like experience of I'm a body, you're over there, I'm over here. and duality and separation and all that, that goes away, and you can access something where you are simultaneously a singular, minuscule point of consciousness, but you're like a drop of consciousness in an ocean that is infinite, and you can feel the infinity at the same time as being the little localized speck. So it's very hard to explain. I mean, if people have had the experience, they'll know, and it's just like, yeah, I know exactly what you're trying to say, and it's really hard to put into words. But yeah, it's a place where you leave the mind and imagination behind and access something much more fundamental and deeper, I think.
Wow. We're going to go deep, because I think this is the thing that I'm interested in, because coming to where you are today, you use the word or the phrases mystics and things like that. Do you define yourself today as a mystic or an atheist or a Hindu? Because you've got some Hindu things going on there, some beliefs there that is in line with Hinduism. So I'm just curious, do you have something today that is like a label that you have?
I'm notoriously hard to label. I don't like labels, because as soon as you do that, you end up stuck in the realm of the mind again, and you end up living in categories, and it's like, I'm this category, and then therefore I'm not all the other stuff. So, you know, a mystic understands that they are, you know, a mystical understanding of me would be, I'm Brendan Murphy, but I'm also everything else, as opposed to being like, I'm just this, it's I am this and everything else.
So you know how I started the chat today and I was like, so who's Brendan Murphy? Do you think like that question was sort of like hard to define, because it's sort of, you talk about this experience that's vast, more vast, and that you're out of that. You're not like just a personality. So what would be like a better way to ask you? Because you must just be like, what I'm imagining is just this constant consciousness that just flows. So it's sort of like you can't pinpoint Brendan Murphy and pin him down. Is that sort of what you describe is, or?
No, actually, no. And that's a really good question. That's a really good question, because some people take those kinds of experiences and they try to locate their identity in those experiences. What I think is much healthier in the long run and more sustainable is to actually integrate those expanded experiences into the persona and personality that you are here and now in space-time, and allow that that expanded perspective to expand you as an individual. So, you know, Cael O'Donnell is still Cael O'Donnell, and you know, I don't want to be anybody's guru, and I don't want to pretend that I'm constantly floating and immersed in this sea of amazing vastness, because most of my waking experience is probably quite similar to yours in many ways. I mean, I'm here in my body, you know, I have to eat, sleep, shit. I got to do my work, you know, all this stuff. But it's the container and the context that all that happens in is very radically altered.
I see. I like that. That's a really grounded kind of approach as well. It makes sense to me, and it's good advice for people who follow what you believe in the mystic kind of sense. So now I'm interested, because I have done your course. I did your course this week. It's a 1-hour masterclass. I think it's the initial masterclass called Evolve Yourself. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the masterclass is called Evolve Yourself. So that's not really the course, but that is the introduction to opening the door to do the actual work with me. Yeah. Exactly.
Because you give all of the breakdowns, the 4 ceremonies at the end and everything. So I want to talk about this because I was very intrigued. I watched the entire thing because I wanted to get to know what you do, because I suppose your website and things like that was great because it gave you so much information about what people have experienced, but it makes you want to know what are they experiencing. So now I've got some notes here because I wanted to run them past you. Hopefully I'm not getting this all for free. Please send an invoice if this is, you know, a session type thing. But you talk of something called a fragmentary wound, and you describe it as something that's in a second chakra. I don't know what a chakra is, but you talk about this fragmentary wound. It's this ancestral kind of wound. Could you tell the audience what a fragmentary wound is and what a second chakra is?
Cool. Okay. So the idea of the chakras, you know, that's a very old Hindu idea. Chakra is a Sanskrit term. It means wheel. So these are vortexes or vortices that basically look like little whirlpools, and they're located. I mean, there's many of them, but there is regarded to be a set of, say, 7 or 8 primary ones within the physical body. So, top of the head, here, and solar plexus. Lower down, you have in the sacral area, another primary one, and then you have down in the perineum region, you have the root chakra, the base chakra. So they're just energy centers. I know a lot of people lately, there've been a lot of ideas circulating, or theories and speculation circulating about what they are and who put them there and this kind of thing. But if you just look at it in terms of like physics, it's just a place where energy and information is pulled into the body from the source field, whatever you want to call it, the vacuum, whatever label you want to use there, and it's pulled into the body, light, energy, information. So those are the chakras. And what we found, and I'm referring to Sol Luckman's system here. He found through doing a lot of muscle testing with people, so kinesiological work, that he kept getting this information that there was a defect around the second chakra area, down in the sacral area, the reproductive center. There was this like disturbance in the energy. And that was ultimately, he ended up terming that the fragmentary body. So that is this apparently, as far as I can see, species-wide dysfunction that we all seem to have until we do something about it. And it's not just him who identified it. So other people have noticed it by using completely different methods. Like my friend Eileen used tuning forks as well. She works with sound, and she scans the energy field of people, and she found this distortion in everybody and in the same place that it was being described. And then, Reiki practitioners I've spoken to have found it, and other people. So it's not just like one guy's idea. There's something there that's measurable and detectable that is a blockage or distortion of energy that's really causing us systemic problems, because it's so low down in the system. What's supposed to happen is our energy is supposed to come through the root chakra as well. So that's like, the root chakra, down near the base of the spine, there's a reserve of energy. It's really electricity. It's an electrical charge reservoir, and it's called by the Hindus, they refer to it as Kundalini. So this is bioelectricity. It's just electricity. We're supposed to be bringing it up through the spine and dispersing it throughout the energy system, and it's supposed to circulate freely. But what Sol found was that this blockage and distortion in the sacral region is preventing that from happening properly. So we all have this huge problem where like the source of our consciousness is massively impaired at a very foundational level. And it's so subtle and so insidious that we don't even notice. And we can't figure out like why so many of us feel like we're stuck on this hamster wheel, and why life's so hard, and why we feel so disconnected and disempowered or frustrated or exhausted. And it's like there's this one thing that's fueling this dynamic in our life, our whole life tapestry, and it's called the fragmentary body. Eileen referred to it as the slavery yoke, because it facilitates kind of slave-like behavior and thinking. And because it is a blockage of the energy that supports our consciousness, we don't end up functioning at the conscious level that we could, and actually embodying all that we could. And it's like they say, we're only using, say, 10% of our brains, and maybe this is partly why, because the flow of electricity is actually impaired. So this method, the first activation we do is a correction of that problem. And it does a whole bunch of stuff, but that is one of the fundamental things that gets rectified in that first ceremony that we do.
So you said that you guys are able to measure this blockage and this phenomenon that's happening. What do you use to measure to measure the blockage, to measure the comings, the goings, what's blocked, why is it blocked? Well, you just described why it's blocked. I apologize, but you said, what is it blocking? I don't understand. What is it blocking? Okay,
so I probably didn't explain it as well as possible. It's a bit tricky. So if I go back to that idea of, if you imagine a human being being kind of like a magnet, and a magnet has a north pole and a south pole, and it's surrounded by this magnetic field. And a human being is actually no different. We are surrounded by an electromagnetic field, and that's just commonly known, commonly accepted. It's not new information at all. What is relatively new information is that we have this other stuff going on that is not well recognized and not easy to pick up and detect, but certain people with certain skill sets have noticed that there is this issue down in, again, that sacral region that we were talking about. And so it's one of those things where we can't really appeal to, your average sort of scientist or mainstream kind of health practitioner or what have you. But as I said, like Eileen, for example, to use her as an example, she works with sound. She also is highly intuitive. And when she hits the tuning fork and scans it through somebody's just above their body, not touching it, just maybe 30 centimeters or so away, she hears the vibration shift. If it hits a patch of distorted energy, a so-called blockage, what happens is she actually hears the pitch of the tuning fork shift. It changes when there's something not quite right there. And so these are the kinds of things. It's like not well-known skill sets, but they're there. These people are out there. They're just not very well known at this point.
I see. So that would be a measuring tool, an example using this fork that Eileen uses, taps it, and you hear a change in the sound. And that would signify that there's something happening there in the energy fields. And that would cause her to go to the next step, perhaps. How do you break it down? Because I've got it written down here, and it's great you mentioned the Kundalini, because you mentioned, well, somebody in your course mentioned Kundalini rising, Kundalini activation, and Christ consciousness. Could you tell us what Kundalini rising, Kundalini activation, and Christ consciousness mean?
Okay, sure. Okay, so if we go back to the Kundalini, the bioelectric charge stored around the base area of the spine that has been considered to be there for many, many centuries. This is something that when someone says Kundalini rising, they're experiencing a sensation of probably usually heat or some kind of sense of energy rising up from that point. And it typically travels up through the spine. And if you look at like the old pictures or the diagrams, people usually depict it like two snakes intertwining, wrapping around each other. So it's kind of like a plasma wave. And that is what people are referring to when they say Kundalini rising. The Kundalini, it's the electrical charge being roused, if you like, and moved and circulated up through the spine and then dispersed through the rest of the nervous system. And if you want to emphasize like the more woo-woo aspect of it, then you can say it's being dispersed also through the chakra points, these wheels, these vortexes of energy, and it's circulating around the electromagnetic field properly when it starts to move. Where in most people, and this is an observation made by many different clairvoyants and seers, it's not circulating properly. It's very minimally functional. And it seems like something has happened to cause us like a collective trauma or whatever happened. But I think we used to be a lot more functional. Our energy system worked quite differently. And it has been said that the center used to reside higher up around the sacral area. And at some point it shifted and found itself located down at the base of the spine. So it's like, if you think of it this way, the base of the spine, the root chakra, is like to do with raw physical functionality, survival instinct. It's like the lowest center of consciousness possible that's available to us. And that's currently where the locus of our biological energy resides. It's sitting there and it's stuck there at the lowest sort of center of consciousness. So our job is partly to shift that and start moving it and circulating it through the system and into the brain, and actually becoming what we are capable of becoming.
Wow. Okay. So I'm actually following now, because these words, like you say, they're woo-woo. They mean nothing to me from a scientist background, psychology background. These words don't mean anything, but you're making sense by, talking about this energy that, is at the base. We call it in psychology, this reptilian brain. But you sort of describe it in the spiritual sense or the energy sense. It's like the executive functioning, the survival kind of traits. I've made a connection there to those people who are from the science background of what you're talking about. So now Christ consciousness, you're using the Jesus Christ. Is that what it is, or is it something else? What is the Christ consciousness?
Well, I guess, because they weren't my words, they were one of my clients. I suppose she was saying something along the lines of feeling a sense of maybe expanded sense of self, a sense of connection to, maybe everything, a sense of connectedness to the divine, to God. Something along those lines sounds, and I think people, when they talk about Christ, they usually are referring to, there's an idea, there's an archetype of Christ that exists, and it's like, okay, so we imagine this being to be very loving, very heart-centered, very equanimous, and so those are probably the kinds of traits that I imagine she was having some experience of when she wrote that.
Okay, because it sounded as if she was having some sort of, I don't know, grandiose experience, and you could feel like Jesus or something. So I'm glad I was able to clear that up with you. So now you talked about the Kundalini rising, that there's some sort of physiological thing that's going on. I wanted to pass by you. These are some things that I wrote down: pulsing heartbeat, stone cold hands, feet buzzing, men reduced to immediate tears, bodily vibrations. Those are some of the things that are happening in the session. Why do those things start happening to people when they're having those sessions? Men reduced to immediate tears. Why are they crying?
I don't know. It was never the goal. It happened. That happened to me after I did a very quick demo of the sound of what it sounds like at the Nexus conference 4 years ago. And it was very brief, but there just seems to be something about the sound of that chant, because there's a particular vowel sequence, and I'm going at the 528 hertz tuning fork pitch. And I don't know, it just seems to resonate with people on a very primal level, and they can't explain why they get so emotional. But it's like, you probably saw the comment of someone who said, I had this instant recognition, like they feel like they know this sound from somewhere, but they can't pinpoint it.
Yes, that's what I was interested. This person was talking about, and the audience that are listening, she was talking about this experience where she felt as if she had heard this sound, she knew this moment, she was so connected to something. That seems really intriguing. Why would she know that sound, and why are people getting so emotional in those moments? Have you really, hit a nerve there in the conscious field or something, and she's sort of feeling her infinite, her eternity, somewhere along the line, she's remembered something from a past life or something. Maybe I'm just philosophizing at this point, but, maybe you can better explain. I mean, I'm sure other people have experienced this before. Why would she be the only one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of, I've had so much weird and interesting feedback from different people. So, I mean, I'm not going to propose to be able to even explain it all. It's just very interesting. It tells me that there's something very, very profound and very interesting going on when we're doing this work, and I can't explain it all. It's just like, okay, so, I mean, I can speculate, like, for example, maybe my voice has a particular quality to it, and maybe combined with that, I'm using the 528 hertz frequency with the tuning fork, so you've got that going on, and maybe there's something there. That frequency is considered to be, it's referred to as love hertz, right? So it's linked to the heart. People have repeatedly linked it back to the heart and the idea of love, and this frequency. If you look in nature in the electromagnetic spectrum, if you at 528 hertz in the visible spectrum, you're landing in the green part of the spectrum, maybe slightly towards yellow, but green is frequently depicted as the dominant color of the heart chakra itself. So there's all these interesting little kind of like coincidences that start to line up and add up. And it's like, okay, well, on an emotional level, I think it's probably resonating with people's limbic systems, and maybe it's tickling their amygdala somehow. And I don't know. It's just a very interesting little mystery at the moment.
Yes, and it is a mystery. I mean, there is psychology to do with sound, and certain chords can strike certain emotions. That's why we have composers in music, the dramatic sounds for certain movies. So now going on to the results, because that's what people want. When they come to see people like you describe yourself as sort of like a DNA activator. It's such a unique kind of niche. And it delivers a lot of things. I mean, it's so broad. It doesn't just say, I'm going to do this. There's so many different things that it provides. So it's sort of like a lucky dip of what in the world you're going to get out of the session, as far as I could tell, because I mean, it says some people, or majority of them, said they had lower back aches and they had went away. They had knee pain, they had lethargy. And then those are physiological things that we can, we can measure. But then it had things like people's purposelessness vanished. So it goes into sort of the things that is more difficult to measure, as opposed to just like the lower back aches. But then after the session, people were saying they were connected to animals and they had thicker and more healthier skin and they felt happy and attracted to more people, and those people were more attracted to them. So then it just starts to drift into, okay, what is going on? So could you tell us, maybe you've seen those reviews, because those are reviews for you or for the session. Why does it drift into all these kinds of different outcomes?
Great question. I think the reason it happens like that is because, I mean, the idea of this, like the theory of the model is that it's addressing DNA and it's honing in and resonating DNA. And DNA is what ultimately is considered to be, it's like the antenna of ours in our cells that reacts or interacts with the field, the quantum field out here. And so what we are, what it is tuned to and resonating with determines the kind of experience that we're having. So in this model, it's like, okay, well, we're doing this thing called DNA activation, and we believe that it's triggering so-called junk DNA, mobile DNA, to move and to do its thing and to remodel the genome and to turn on certain codes and turn off certain codes and activate healing and all this kind of stuff. But because the modality, and because if you address something at the level of DNA, it's the most fundamental level of who we are biologically. And as I said, it's interacting with the field. It's like broadcasting our frequency. So you're going to have you've noticed, like there's people who say, oh, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, my back doesn't hurt anymore, I'm not tired anymore, I've got more energy. So there's all these like immediate or obvious kind of physical effects, but then you have the whole life tapestry being affected as well, because when you shift that resonating pattern, that DNA pattern that interacts with the field, then you're not just changing your physical body, you're not just addressing something in a reductive way, you're actually shifting your entire, almost like not your identity as such, but yeah, the whole tapestry of the fabric of you is shifting at a fundamental level. So your reality has to shift at the same time in ways that will show up very strangely sometimes and very bizarrely. Like, I don't know if you've heard the story of Jung and the scarab beetle.
No.
So that's a great story, and I do tell it in the book. So long story short, he was in a very intensive process with a woman who had shown, psychotherapy, and a woman who had a lot of psychological resistance. And at a very crucial point in time, she was in the room with him. At a very, very crucial point in time, this scarab beetle flew in to the window and started tapping on the window. And that was part of, this beetle was a feature in this, if memory serves me correctly, a very important, significant dream she had just had. And so they were analyzing this dream, and then suddenly this scarab beetle shows up at the window, and it's in a part of the world where these scarab beetles don't even exist. So you can imagine, like, she was mind blown at the synchronicity. This is what Jung called synchronicity, right? These acausal connections that we can't explain through normal mechanisms. It's just, there's something about the non-locality of the fabric of reality that we are immersed in that we can correlate with these external entities or systems in ways that don't have anything to do with space and time. It's instantaneous. So there's this connection principle that Jung talked about. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is like, when you change something, when someone has a very powerful experience internally, frequently what happens is their reality externally mirrors it in very strange ways. And I had a very specific case of that which I mentioned in the book, where I was reading Michael Talbot's book, which we were talking about earlier. And there was a passage in it where he's talking about Rosa Parks, the activist who was who led the charge in the Montgomery bus boycott, standing up for the rights of Black people in America. And as I was reading this passage in the book, this book which was life-changing for me, I'm reading this thing for like the first time, and I'm blown away. I'm in this state of like awe and wonder, and how amazing is this? And then as I'm reading that passage about Rosa Parks, on the radio comes on this, suddenly they start talking about Rosa Parks, and it's just like, what is going on? This is bizarre. Like, it's not something that you hear talked about on the radio every day, but it showed up at a very poignant, like very psycho-spiritual powerful moment in my life. So non-local connections that we can't really explain through the ordinary channels, but yeah, it happens.
I like that explanation, and that's an amazing experience. So the non-local, this non-local place where we can't sort of see it's just happening. So this synchronicity, I don't see that happening in my life a lot. I mean, it's been described in sort of in psychology that some people in maybe in those moments they are on a hunt and they search for those moments, and 333, I woke up in the middle of the night and then all of a sudden my cat came in, you know, and they draw these conclusions, but they may not realize that their sleep pattern has you know, created itself to wake up at that time, you know, because that's when they stopped watching Netflix or something. So so these synchronicities, how do you actually, because we're all in this world together, how do you start to get more of them if you want to experience them? Or do they just happen out of nowhere? Do you need to read a book for it to happen? Who's controlling it? I mean, who's there, you know, that's something creating those moments? Because I mean, more people experience them more than others, and then other people don't even recognize them. So what's happening there when spiritual people have them more than people who are not so spiritual?
I think spiritual people have them more, and they also are looking for them more at the same time. So, you know, someone who's open like that, there is just, again, this, you know, if you look at examples like the scarab beetle story, you know, that you can't explain this through the ordinary channels of physical understanding and mechanics, but something happens when someone goes through like an experience of metanoia, or they go through a profound life perspective shift, that reality around them mirrors that back at them in ways that it's just like, it's undeniable. Like, it's so bizarre and so unlikely that you can't actually rationalize it away. And I think when you are openly aware of that interactivity and that relationship that we have with the field, it invites a more, if you like, it invites more communication from the field. Because you're saying, well, okay, look, I get it. I'm here, I'm listening, I can hear you, kind of thing. And then obviously it's going to open the channels a little bit more for whatever that background level of intelligence is, which is there. Like, you know, we talked about the mystical experiences of infinite consciousness. So we're all immersed in a field of consciousness, which predicates intelligence. And so within that, we're having the ability to choose, if you like, how much synchronicity we want to invite in. Like, if we're closed-minded people have very little. And when they do have it, they don't notice it. So they're filtering it out. It's a bias. And when you have like a scarab beetle moment, it's like, you're not hunting for it. You're not looking for it. It's like, bam, and you can't deny it. It's so psychologically meaningful. That's the key word. It's so meaningful that you can't rationalize it away and make it go away. So what I found in this work, by going down this road of working with sound in this particular system, is that the level of synchronicity for me just kind of exponentially accelerated, and it became more and more obvious that it's like a feedback mechanism between us and the field. And it sort of seems to me like it's acting often as a guidance mechanism. Like, people have crucial points of their lives where they need to make a choice or decision or have a realization, and they get these little nudges and clues from, you know, external reality, which help them just align with the most true, or you know, whatever path, the best path for them at that point in time, and just nudge them in that kind of way. And for me, the synchronicity kind of just became a part of the daily, like, background fabric of my reality, until it's just like, I think what happens is, if you are living in your truth and following your path, and on the right path, then it kind of, that feedback mechanism eventually becomes kind of almost unnecessary. Like, the synchronistic events become a little bit unnecessary, because those, if they're guidance, then you don't really need them. Like, if you're living in alignment already, then you're not going to need all these little nudges coming in weird, spooky ways to get your attention, because you're already kind of doing the thing. I hope that makes some sort of sense.
It does. And that's the word that I was having in my head. Spooky. This non-local thing that is sort of nudging you, this consciousness out there that, I mean, the Rosa Parks thing and the Beetle thing, and I could probably, and that's true, maybe I am closed-minded and I filter things out during the day, and as I go, you know, that thing just happened and it's not at the forefront. But if I really dug deep into it, perhaps maybe that was sort of a nudge from the consciousness out there. So it's interesting that we're talking about this, because it's sort of making us rethink sort of the purposes, because you mentioned that people have maybe these nudges because the universe, or this non-local consciousness, the field, you call it the field, is trying to align you back to a path. It just makes your mind wander, doesn't it? Of like, why does it want you on a path? Why is that the path? Why does anyone care about Beatles and Rosa Parks? Out there, if there's something. But I suppose that's where it really takes it. And it's really great having you, Brendan, because when you look at from an outside perspective and you see the work you do, I define you sort of just as this spiritual healer guru guy, but really there's a lot more substance there. And I mean, you've been doing this for many years, so you're able to explain it in ways where people who are closed-minded and not so spiritual don't really get it, but you can describe it in a way that people can get it. So I'm just sort of wondering from this point, why are there certain people that are the spiritual gurus, or the people that are, I'm the one that knows this stuff, pay me and it will fix itself? Why are there people that are anointed or allotted in the world to do this? Why are there people?
Do you mean in general? Like I think I need you to kind of clarify that a little bit for me. Like, so what kind of people?
So like the people that, like you were talking about, Eileen, the people that have these practices and they use tools, people like yourself that have businesses that profit from being able to align people back and do these healings and things like that. Why are there people, certain people that can do it? Why can't we do it just ourselves? If you just get a book and then all of a sudden you can do it on yourself, why would somebody need another person to do it? Because if we look at, maybe I'll just bring it in sort of to bring context. If we look into the Christian world, there are ministers and healing evangelists that tour around the world, and they charge lots of money to do big presentations, and you see the activities that happen in those big gatherings. People are falling down and they're crying, like some of the experiences that your people have experienced in their sessions with you. But I come back to, there are people that take on board this, I'm the guider for you to make your way, to guide you to health, to well-being, to freedom. Why are there people like that?
No, we're all on a journey. We're all kind of on the hero's journey. And if you have a level of like insight that maybe the next person has, then it's almost like a responsibility to share that and pass that on. You know, it's like we like, I can speak for myself. Like, I can't help but do what I do. I don't have an off switch. I can't turn this stuff off. Like, it is what I live and breathe and eat. So speaking of eating, at some point I have to receive remuneration for something so that I can continue eating. So there's that aspect of it as well, you know, like that exchange so that we can all kind of continue surviving and doing what we do. But yeah, there's this odd phenomenon of people they wake up, they have their awakening experience, and then they just are like consumed almost with the idea of trying to then be of service. And it might not always take the same form, like it'll be in different ways, but people find a way to help other people according to their skill set and personality. Whereas often people without that perspective, they get caught up in the vortex of, you know, get a job, reproduce, get married, you know, save for retirement, you know, have grandkids, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you're taking the blinkers off and going, well, oh shit, there's all this other stuff that's possible. It's like one of my buddies who read my book a few years back, she was like, if all this is possible, then what the hell have I been doing with my life? Like, that was her reaction to it, you know? So it's kind of like we take the blinkers off and it's like, well, okay, we're on this journey together. and we're all ultimately going to the same place. Like, we're all trying to climb the mountain and we're all taking our own path to it. But if I am one step, all I need to be is one little step ahead of the next person, and then I can help them get up that step. And it's like, I think humans just innately have the urge to help each other, really. And I think that the way that civilization is wired, particularly with the debt-based banking system, it really discourages that natural instinct, and we're all fragmented and separated, atomic families and all this kind of stuff, and we're all kind of just struggling to survive. But underneath it all is that sort of irrepressible instinct that we actually want to be connected and we want to help each other. And, you know, people go out of their way in extraordinary circumstances and take huge risks and put their lives on the line to help a complete stranger out of a dangerous situation. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, at the end of the day, unless you're a psychopath, and probably like maybe 3% of us are, not including myself in that, you know, like, we just want to help. Like, we get that huge emotional payoff from being able to serve somebody. It makes us feel good on a fundamental level. And I can't do it any other way. Like, I'm kind of wired to do the kind of work that I'm doing with my writing and research and this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't think there's any hope for me to go into the normal channels.
So it's not the $215 that really pays off for you. It's the emotional satisfaction that person has had some kind of relief or something benefiting them in the session.
Yeah, I mean, when I get those kinds of testimonials back, it's pretty, it's pretty humbling. Like, yeah, I don't know what to say about it other than, yeah, there's an enormous sense of satisfaction from being able to go, yeah, you know, like, I helped that person. That person's life is better off than before they met me. And that's like, you know, that's it. You know, $215 is not a lot of money. It's I mean, yeah, it's hardly making me a multi-millionaire, but fortunately, there's other ways of making money. And, you know, this stuff is just kind of like, yeah, I mean, we help people, we expand their consciousness and their awareness, and ultimately, it's about the transformation of the human being and the evolution of the human being. Because at an individual level, yes, you create a better life for someone, and they create a better life for themselves, and you empower that. But collectively, we also need to be evolving and moving past the level that we've been stuck at for so long. So there's that kind of like responsibility on a bigger picture level as well, I think.
See, you know, Brendan, I just had a thought. You talk about the non-local consciousness and it, you know, wanting to bring you back into alignment. Do you think people like Muhammad and Jesus and people like that being dropped into the history, and Brendan Murphy, do you think that there's something that is dropping these people to bring people back into alignment? Do you think that's why that Christ consciousness testimony, maybe that person was getting this awakening from something out there, that they were also being chosen, or maybe their purpose is to domino effect, send the message out and bring people back into alignment? Do you think that you're maybe one of those things that have been selected to be dropped into history?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you can look at it in a few different ways. Man, that on a personal level, there's a whole other story there, which we probably don't have time for. And yeah, there is this, I think there's an imperative in the collective consciousness to try to, it's sort of weird because we're conflicted. We're trying to stay in the same place and we're trying not to evolve, but then there's this imperative that is saying we need to evolve and we need to move forward. And then you get these like kind of avatar type characters showing up who kind of try to facilitate that. And I think that sort of impulse in the collective may not actually originate in the human collective. It may be something, I think it's supported by something impersonal in the universe itself, in the foundational kind of structure or configuration of it, that the universe is essentially hardwired or biased towards higher and higher levels of self-organization and self-awareness. And so it's a natural outgrowth of that inherent dynamic, that nature of the universe, to then naturally produce people who want to wake up and want to help others wake up, because it's a function of that underlying imperative.
That's a really good explanation. I really like that. I just wanted to throw it out there because I was curious to know, in these times that we're living in at the moment, particularly around this COVID-19 flying around, As a spiritual guru, do you think that you could do something for COVID-19?
Well, I don't. I have to pull you up on the guru thing. I don't like that word, and I don't want to be anyone's guru. I do like to. I am quite known in my sort of community. I'm known as like the voice of reason, and I'm the guy who speaks up and maybe says the things that people don't want to hear. But it's like, okay, let's all just calm down. Let's all just take a breath. This isn't what it appears to be, kind of thing. And so right now, I just see that we've got like mass hysteria and mass hypnosis, actually. We've been hypnotized into manifesting and worsening something that arguably may not have happened at all if it wasn't for the power of suggestion. And I think there's a huge psychosomatic phenomenon unfolding, which may or may not be driven by an actual medical condition, which is a whole other discussion, right? That's actually a really murky area that very few people are aware of how dodgy and murky it gets. But I feel like I'm probably going a bit off track in answering your question there.
So just briefly, could you tell us, maybe, because this is the place that I wander, and that's the dangerous waters that I play in, is this murky water. To know, is COVID-19 real?
It's a great question, and it looks like to me the ability for the medical world to demonstrate and prove its reality is extremely limited. Scientists claimed to have identified and isolated the measles virus. It turns out that wasn't the case. They claimed back decades ago that they had isolated the polio virus, but that turned out to not be the case. So as you go through, case by case by case, it's like this house of cards, and it starts to fall down. And it's like, okay, so we know bacteria are real because we can see them really easily with a light microscope. But viruses are much, much smaller, and they have to be seen with an electron microscope. And then there's all these like diagnostic issues. You've got to purify your sample. You've got to be able to isolate it and all this stuff before you can say, yes, this is definitely what we think it is. And that discussion isn't happening. So my 2 cents worth is basically, unless you are, most of the people who are getting sick, according to COVID-19, are already ill. They're already susceptible. They're already compromised. And it's, it's sad, but that's what it is. Like, they were going to get the cold or the flu anyway. And if they died, they were probably going to die from that anyway. Like, that's the reality that we have day in, day out. Every year there's flu season. Every year we get the coughs and colds and all this stuff. And it's like, if you're not immune compromised, you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine, because a healthy cell, what happens is when we get sick or poisoned and chronically stressed, cells actually respond by producing viral material. So we create it endogenously. We're building it internally. And then that will be picked up in a test like a PCR test. And that will then mean you'll test positive for COVID-19 when in reality, your cells are making this stuff internally as a result of being toxic, being malnourished, all this stuff. So these are the parts of the discussion that aren't being had. And we can actually turn the whole paradigm on its head. And if we do that, we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to be paranoid. We can just kind of be sensible and go on about our business. It's really seems to be a case of they're driving this with bogus statistics. And if we just stop listening to the mass media and the talking heads in the government and the medical system, we can rise above the fear, and then we won't be stressed out. Like, we won't be in fear, and we won't be so likely to create these symptoms and get sick in the first place, because again, the power of suggestion and stress means that we will do this stuff to ourselves unconsciously if you get stressed out enough. So let's not do that. Let's stay in our center, stay calm, look at the facts, embrace doubt and question everything. Question everything. And you'll see when you do that, when you do the homework, very often you realize, oh, well, there's really nothing to actually be afraid of here. And maybe I'll just turn the TV off now.
I can see why your friends call you the voice of reason, and that you say things just because you're not going to change it for anyone. And I love that. And I think that the take-home point for it is to rise above the fear. Whatever the doubt is, whatever the conspiracies are, just rise above the fear and to question everything. And I think that that's a really good take-home point. Brendan, I want to give you an opportunity now to talk about your book and to talk about your transforming course, Evolve Yourself, is this Sunday, the 29th. When this airs, it's going to be tomorrow for those who are going to be listening. So could you give us a rundown of your book and this movement, so if people want to jump on board?
Okay, yeah, cool. So my book is The Grand Illusion, a synthesis of science and spirituality. And you can get that through my website, which is brendandmurphy.com. It covers a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, remote healing, the quantum mechanics stuff, the government-funded psychic spies programs, the research that's been done into all the different human psychic abilities and what they look like and how they work. And it's very, very, very comprehensive. I mean, it's 665 pages, and it is something that I think will still be very, very relevant. It's not a book that's going to date easily, and I've had a number of people, basically tell me that it's been a life-changing kind of a read because of the way that it is structured and the content of it, and it sort of follows a logical format. I designed it very deliberately to take people through a little bit of a journey and just continually expand their sense of possibility and identity at the same time. So we cover the mystical experiences, the foundational fabric of reality and what that looks like, clairvoyant research into the fabric of reality and subatomic particles. So there's a lot of really, really interesting material in there. I could go on for a while.
I love that. Brendan, we've come to the end of our show today. I want to say thanks so much for jumping on. I've had a great time just being able to pick your brain and just do it in a way where there's just no filters. We can just talk about it and I can ask all the questions that I want to ask. And I'm sure the audience have been inspired today to really think outside the box and to question things, but also to reconsider maybe some more core things about ourselves as opposed to just the daily grind. And I think that that's probably the take-home message. So, Brendan, thanks for jumping on Why Believe today.
Awesome, man. Thanks heaps, Cael. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in today.
Go into the draw to win $200. Leave a rating and review of this episode of Why Believe on Apple Podcasts today. Follow us on Instagram at Why Believe Podcast for the latest shows, upcoming guests, and exclusive content.